Hello and welcome to the Storied Way Perspective with Rituparna. As you navigate the world through stories, you stumble upon other creators, other voices, other men and women who are also telling stories. As I started the podcast, I put out a little post on LinkedIn telling people about my podcast, which is going to launch soon. And one of the first few people who sort of very enthusiastically reached out and very graciously helped out and said, I would love to speak to you about stories, was Sangeeta. Sangeeta has a podcast. She has a newsletter. She has an e-magazine about her. And it's a space where she speaks and shares women's stories. She's created a platform where she invites women to tell their stories through her podcast, and she tells their stories through her e-newsletter. So when I read about her, I said, Sangeeta, I must have you on my podcast. I must talk to you about women and creating a space for women to access stories, to share stories, and to also seek out stories of women who are like them or who they want to be like or who they could become. So welcome, Sangeeta. Sangeeta, welcome to the Storied Way Perspective.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. And I can so resonate with what you said because like you said, I'm doing pretty much the same thing, maybe a little different, but I think the end goal remains the same. So thank you so much for having me on the show.
So I'll tell you one of the pet reasons why I said yes instantly after I checked out your podcast and your magazine is because when I started my journey as a television producer, where you're just about in your early 20s and you're raring to go and you want to tell all kinds of stories that is going to shift the narrative about different things in the world. I landed myself in the production team of a women's show.
Okay.
And my show was called All About Her. And when you start your journalism career, I wasn't the kind of young producer, a trainee producer for who women's stories came very naturally, very very unlike, because I grew up in a girls' school. I grew up into a girls' college, one of the best girls' colleges in the country. So the women's narrative was very close to my heart, but the kind of narrative that we wanted to share on television, which was about makeup, about fashion, which was about the more glitzy, glamoury kind of attraction to women and girls, was not the kind of stories I wanted to tell. I wanted to tell these hard-hitting stories of women who are resilient, who are strong, who've taken charge of the narrative of their lives, and they are deciding about how to live their life, how to navigate their life. And there I was stuck about talking about makeup and beauty and fashion, which I was completely like a fish out of water. So when I read the name of your show, I said, "Oh my God, this is like going back." And let me go and see what does Sangeeta talk about. Who are her guests? So let me start with that. What kind of stories, women's stories? What kind of stories attract you?
So, I think at the outset, I will not be able to say what kinds because I feel that every woman's life has a story. So, whether you are the girl next door or you are a celebrity, there is a story behind you. There is a story of your journey, which I think needs to be shared and which other women need to know about. Because, again, like I said, at the very core, I believe every woman, all women are similar to each other. We face different kinds of struggles, which may be different in terms of the time span or when, at what point of time in our lives, but basically they are very, very similar. So when you tell these stories or you relate these stories, somewhere, you're making a difference to someone's life. Someone out there is, able to resonate and say, oh my God, she's also going through what I went through or what I'm going through. And I feel that, the kind of society that we are in, like several times we're told that don't go and wash your dirty linen in public, don't tell people about your problems. And there are so many things which are festering inside. And if we don't address them, if we don't deal with them, they're going to become toxic, which they do. And then, of course, you have these mental health issues and all of that. So I feel that, every woman has a story. It's just that you have to be able to see how you can get that story out of her. So I deal with this storytelling in different ways. Like I write short stories. I started out by doing that, when I hadn't really thought of speaking to women. Then I started talking to them and writing about it. And now, of course, as you know, I am, interviewing them and having conversations. So I don't think I like to stick to a particular kind of women. I think every woman has a story which needs to be told.
So let's go back in time. You mentioned that you started off writing stories, writing fiction, short
Yeah,
stories.
yeah, yeah.
Your protagonists are always women.
Yes,
All right. And then you also you are teaching in Delhi
yeah,
University, and you still are, right?
yes, yes.
And you're teaching girls and boys together, or
Yes.
is it just all right? At what point in your life did you sort of pivot towards women and women's stories? Does it have anything to do with the fact that you are meeting young girls and boys in college every day? And then you understand, because of, of course, having lived a life and a fruitful life, having grown through the lifespan of a woman yourself, you
Yeah.
see, did at any given point of time, did you sort of think about that these young girls also will get out and live a life of their own?
Yeah, yeah, of course. That's how this whole thing came about. So I
Mm.
started my platform about 8 years ago.
Mhm.
And there were various reasons why I did this. The first and the foremost reason was that my elder son, he was going to go off to college,
Mm.
and my husband was moving overseas. So I was left with my
Mhm.
younger one here. So the first thing was I had a lot of time. So teaching was something that I was doing. Then I did have, evenings and weekends which were pretty, like free as compared to when my husband was around. So I was looking to do something. And my older son, because I think I'd helped him with his college applications, so he somehow felt that, I can write well. And of course, I've always been a voracious reader. So he told me, why don't you start writing? And of course, okay, like, to cut a long story short, I figured out how to blog, how to, navigate around the technicalities of that. And it was a very, very natural progression for me to write stories about women.
Mhm.
Because, so first, of course, like, I'm a woman myself who's gone through, the various ups and downs of life, from having lost my father when I was just 18, to then, coming to terms with it, and then working hard to build a career, pursue that career, got married, to a high flying corporate executive, managing home, work, going through that time when I thought that I was a superwoman and I could do everything, which I would now tell everyone, please, please, please never believe that.
Yeah.
Did all of that, continued with it. And then also, went through various issues in life. And that was one part. Another part was these girl students of mine. So
Mm.
I am not only a teacher, a classroom teacher, in the sense that I go and teach and that's it. I'm available beyond the
Yeah.
classroom, where my students can reach out to me, and any issue, whether it's personal or it has to do with their academics, they can reach out to me and we can talk about it. So I realized, there were different kinds of girls, some of them coming from these, tier 2, tier 3 cities, finding it difficult to navigate this big city, sometimes going completely berserk with all the freedom and all the liberty that they were getting. Then girls who've grown up in Delhi, but in conservative families where it was very difficult for them to pursue careers because,
Mm.
education was only meant to make them eligible for getting married.
Yeah.
Then other kinds of girls, very, very, how should I say, very comfortable backgrounds, but again, a lot of money, lot of facilities, but no independence. So there were different kinds of things which were coming forward. Then also I realized that amongst my friend circle also, women were having different kinds of issues, sometimes with relationships, sometimes with their husband, sometimes with their families. So I just felt that, like, many times you can't talk to people, or you don't
Mm.
have people who you can talk to. Like, I
Wow.
remember when I got married, my mother, I felt she'd done so much for me. So if I had any kind of questions, any kind of doubts, I felt very hesitant, because I said that I can't put any pressure on her. But then I did have, how to navigate a relationship, how to build a relationship, issues related to sex. There were so many things. So I felt that, why not start writing about these kind of issues by looking around me, by whatever I have observed and imbibed. And, of course, a fiction which could, have to do with real life events. So there is this, I remember I have written a story about these two women who become friends, lifelong friends, once their children decide to get married. They've never known each other. And initially, they don't want their children to get married to each other. So they are like, really, really anti all
Hmm.
of that. But then
Hmm.
how they become the best of friends.
Mhm.
Then, how a man and woman can have a platonic relationship, and how the world just loves to, look at it with only that one meaning in mind.
Yeah.
Then the relationship between two sisters, father and daughter, mother and daughter. So various kinds of relationships I explored. And then, of course, the gradual progression was that I felt that, so this was all put into a blog, which became an e-magazine. And then, of course, I wanted to do other stuff with the magazine, in the sense, not just stories, wanted it to be an all inclusive thing. So yes, I did add beauty and, books and
Hmm.
travel and all of that. And then, of course, then I started interviewing women, because I felt that, a one-on-one interaction may reveal something more. And then finally, now, of course, I've come to this, podcasting, which I'm doing now. So yeah, the inspiration has been my own life, the life of my students, and all the women around me.
Like you, while you've had a longer career in academics, I taught about 5 8 years, 5 years in
Mm.
Delhi University, and I taught young undergrads and mostly girls in girls' colleges.
Mm.
And though I went into teach storytelling, uh, somewhere the classes were about entirely other things, which was about them navigating their stories, their lives. And you so beautifully explained, illustrated that they're girls from all different walks of life who sort of walk into college and they are beginning their lives, independent lives in
Yeah.
some ways, and they're trying to figure out who they are and what they are meant to do and things like that. And there's a lot of ambiguity and confusion. I would tell them this every day that, like, I remember what I was like 20 years back when I
Mm.
sat like you in a college in Delhi University, and I am speaking to you from that point of view. So
Mm.
not like a woman in her 40s or her late 30s who's sort of more older and more mature, however you look at it. But I want you to look at me from that perspective, because I am looking at you from that perspective.
Mm.
So one of the girls, she asked me one day uh, that if there is anything that you want to tell that young version of yourself, what is it that you will say? And I said, I will just hold her hand, I'll give her a hug, and I'll say, you'll be just fine.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that you need to hear, that you will be just fine. Don't listen to anything, anyone. Don't follow anyone. Just listen to your heart. You will do fine as long as you follow your own footsteps.
It's uncanny that you say this, because in fact, about maybe 3 or maybe 4 years, 5 years ago, I don't remember, I had written an article on this. What would I
Hmm.
say to my younger self? And pretty much the same thing, that, be sure whatever you're doing, you're going to turn out fine.
Hmm.
Be confident, believe in yourself, all these things. So in fact, this is one of the questions which I ask my guests in the podcast, that what would you like to tell the young girls? Because I think
Yeah.
these are the things that they need to
Yeah.
know. There
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
world at large which is telling them that this is not right, that's not right, you're not looking good, you're not doing this. But very few people are telling them that, please believe in yourself, have the
Right.
confidence to do what you want to do. So these are the kind of things that I talk about. Yeah. So
Yeah, yeah, and I think that sort of wisdom comes to you only when once you grow a little
yeah.
older. That
Yes.
you want to tell the younger version of yourself something, and the girls who are still young, they want to figure out where will I be when I'm 40, or
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
will I be in my 30s.
Right.
But so the question is, do you think it's important for young girls to have role models? What kind of role models did you have while you were growing up? And
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think role models is so, so essential, because a role model is showing you the path ahead. So
Mhm.
I have a dream, I have an aspiration. I want to say, I want to work in the corporate world, for instance. And this is actually very close to my heart right now, because my doctorate is based on this. So I start out my career, I'm at the entry level. And if I look up and see that, oh my God, this woman is on the board of this company, how much confidence is it going to give me? Because I know that I am, say, what, 24, 25 today, and she's probably in her early 50s or late 40s. So that means I can also do that.
Mhm.
So a role model, not only puts things in perspective, but gives you that inspiration and motivation and confidence that you want. If you don't see somebody else who's done it, you're not sure of, whether you'll be able to make it or not. So I think, and it's not only for girls, it's for boys as well. Everybody needs it.
Absolutely.
So whatever I want to do in life, even if I want to be a homemaker, of course there are role models, but doing it the best way, which I think is the best way. So role models, I think, are very, very critical. We all
Yeah.
need them. And okay, so when I was growing up, I mean, it may be a cliched way to put it, but my role model was definitely my mom.
Wow.
My mother, she was, so like I told you before we started recording, that I belong to a Sikh family.
Mhm.
So my mother, she was from this place called Ludhiana, and she was one of the first women out there to complete her matriculation, which was a real big thing in
Yeah.
those days, and I'm talking of the 1950s. She did that. She went on to study in a college, and of course her parents fully supported her. Then she went to live as a paying guest in another city of Punjab all by herself. And she got married. And my parents had a long distance marriage for a very, very long time because my father understood her ambitions. So he was in Chennai. She was in this place called Sangrur. They had a child. The child was looked after by the grandmother. And then, of course, when she became pregnant with my sister, she decided that, now I can't really, put the burden on my mother. And then when she lost her husband, my father, my mom was barely 54, 55. And how she kind of took it upon herself to ensure that not only do I complete my graduation, but I go on to study more, I become financially independent, and how she dealt with people everywhere. I mean, there were relatives, there were friends who, would keep pressurizing her to get me married off because, you're a
Hmm.
single parent now, and all of those things. And she would say,
Yeah.
no, till the time she does not become financially independent, I'm not even going to plant that seed in her head. So she was my first role model. Then, of course, as I moved on in life, I think one of my role models was also my economics teacher in college. So in school, I studied economics, but I never liked it. I think it had to do with the teacher. But when I found this teacher in college, her name is Reena Chadda. My God, what a phenomenal teacher. She used to come every day with this passion and drive and, like really enthusiastic about the subject, and the way she used to talk about demand and supply. My God, it was like you would look at her and you would say, okay, I want to be like her.
Hmm.
So I think even this seed was planted at that time when I decided that if I can, I will also teach this subject. And then, of course, over the years, there have been women, different kinds of men and women who I've admired for different reasons, for being able to follow their passions, for being able to stand up. Because, many times now, of course, like you say, with age, you become wiser and better in, dealing with things. But, I was one of those who was not able to always speak my mind.
Mhm.
I would think 10 times, and then ultimately I would only keep thinking and not being able to speak. So even those people who could speak their mind, they were, role models for me. People who could cook were role models for me because I couldn't when I got married. Now, of course, I can. So, different stages of life, you have different things to look up to.
The Storied Way perspective is designed and developed by your Storybag Podcasting Network. Podcasting is a fantastic medium that brings listeners to gather around a story. As the podcasting industry grows by leaps and bounds, we at Your Storybag want to help storytellers, businesses, brands, and organizations leverage the power of narrative. We are not an agency. Instead, you can imagine us as a collective or a cohort that incubates and nurtures emerging story based podcasts in the airwaves. If you'd like to collaborate, commission, or create your own story based podcast, reach out to us at podcast@yourstorybag.com.
The women in our lives, they grew up in a time where their world was much smaller than our
Yes.
world. Today we have a podcast, we have a magazine, we have social media to connect with one another, to be inspired or to seek out more stories. But the women in our families were sort of trailblazers in their own right, because all they had was themselves and their own dreams and their passions, and the fire in themselves to sort of make every stand up on their feet without seeking any inspiration from outside.
Right.
And if you were to ask your mother who was her icon, she may have seen somebody else who had a very different life in her own family, or she would have said, "Yeah, there was no one, and I just did what I had to do. It wasn't something which I found answers from somewhere else,
Right.
or I modeled myself on someone else who I met at
Yeah.
another point
Yeah.
of my life." But today, uh, and I felt the need, and I sort of understood that even with peers my age,
Hmm.
while we were in college and while we sort of navigated our careers in the beginning, and while the media world was also sort of coming out and sort of telling stories of women or even CEOs and all kinds of things, that listening to somebody's story also fills you up with a lot of understanding of why a woman or a man should have agency in their life, whether it is to do with what are the decisions I'm taking, what are the kind of choices I'm making, how do I see myself vis-a-vis other women or men, and with the other gender as well.
Yeah.
So the question that I want to ask you next is about the audience that you create your content for, whether it's your short stories, whether it's your podcast, whether it's your e-magazine, and how important are these stories? Of course, you're telling mostly the stories of women and girls, but how important is it for men and women to understand the woman's story today and where it is leading? How important is that bit of that audience segmentation for you?
I think it's extremely essential because eventually
Really?
men and women have to coexist.
Yeah.
There are no two ways about it. And, when we talk about feminism or we talk about women empowerment, we're not saying that we're taking away power from men. We're
Mm.
saying that we are kind of dividing it and trying to make
Yeah.
it a more balanced world. So, obviously, and how is that going to happen? That is going to happen only when men and women understand each other. They are open to looking at things from the other person's perspective. Like,
Mm.
I'll give you an example. I had this guest on my show, so a male guest who was telling
Mm-hmm.
me that how he is now, very, very skeptical about approaching any woman to help in any way. He says, because you don't know how that woman will take it. So he gave me an
Yeah.
example that he was flying somewhere and he was, kind of waiting to sit when he saw this young girl who was struggling to put her, bag in the overhead this thing cabin. So he just kind of offered, that should I help you? And he said that she almost bit my head off. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I mean, I didn't mean any offense. I was just trying to help you. So, he said that sometimes, I was only trying to help. But maybe she was coming from a different space or
Yeah.
whatever, I don't know, whatever it was. So, how important it is for women also to know that not all men are the same.
Yeah.
Yes. Similarly, how important it is for men to understand, like, again, I'll give you an example of a guest I had who, I think it was the first time I ever heard a man say that when a woman is telling me something, she's sharing something, she's not telling me to solve a problem for her. She's only venting, she's only sharing. He says most of the times men feel that, oh, she needs help, so let me just jump in and start helping. So I felt, my God, that's so wonderful. So, these little things, which can make your relationships so much more easier and healthier. That can
Mm-hmm.
only happen if you listen to the other person's point of view. And I feel on a platform like this, where we are talking about such things, for that matter, this reminds me that yesterday I interviewed someone, a young boy. I mean, he's not a young boy, a young man for that matter. He is working in the space of female education, financial independence, financial literacy. Because independence is one thing, you're earning your own money, but what are you doing with that money? How are you making that money grow? That, and then he's also working with an NGO which is providing menstrual care to women. So when a man is coming and talking about such issues, you understand that this is normal. This is
Mm.
something which a woman goes through every month, and it's okay to talk about it. There is
Yeah.
no need to brush it under the carpet. So when men and women both talk about these kinds of issues, I think they'll help each other and they'll help the world at large. So I feel, yes, my stories, my conversations are meant for both to listen to and understand the other perspective, because like I said, men and women have to coexist.
it's also important for women and men to sort of shed the biases or the prejudices that they have about each other's stories.
Yeah.
We also come with the baggage of having lived with men and women in our families, and we sort of understand, okay, that they are very backward or they are very patriarchal, or every man is trying to take advantage of me or oppress me of some kind. But not every man is that. So
Yeah.
perhaps creating those kind of spaces where the stories are intermingling, I think that sort of changes the perspective. Let's talk about women and girls again.
Mm.
The life stage of a woman sort of shifts
Yeah.
over a period of time. So, in with respect to that, what are the kind of stories that women seek when, as they are navigating through their lives? We know when girls are sort of stepping out, they're dealing with independence and agency, making choice, making the right choice about life partner, about their bodies, for that example,
Yeah.
for that matter, when they get married, about choosing when to and have motherhood, and what to do with their careers. Navigating the ups and downs of their careers. Uh, as the children grow, maybe the distance from their partners, or the closeness or their partnership with their
Yeah.
husbands, navigating family. I mean, a woman's life is sort of going through so many changes. I don't see men talking about it in that way,
Mm.
unfortunately. But a woman is affected by different needs and wants at different
Yes.
points in her life.
Yeah.
So, from your understanding of the way you've navigated through women's stories, through the stories you write, through the stories that you investigate or for your magazine, and the stories that you hear from your podcast guests, tell us something about the different stories that women see.
See, like you said, every woman goes through different stages. All right. And at every stage, you are looking for some guidance, someone to show you the path. So you're looking for those stories, for stories which show you that path. So, in that sense, you're looking for role models. So, if I am like just stepping into my professional world, I want to know what are the kind of pitfalls that I'm likely to face.
Mhm.
Can I find somebody who can mentor me, who can coach me, who can tell me what should I be doing? Of course, nobody is going to be able to live your life, but at least show you that guiding light that this is how it is going to be. I'm getting married. Again, I want to be able to know what are the experiences that married women go through. So I've been an independent woman so far, but now I'm going to step into life with another person. Maybe he's a complete stranger, and even if he's not, living with someone is completely different from just knowing them otherwise, right? So how am I going to be able to navigate different situations that I will face? And in India, of course, when you marry a person, you also marry his family. All
Mm.
that comes. So how am I able to go, be able to deal with them? Then things like other relation apart the relationship with your husband, but with other people, things about sex. Who is going to tell me? How am I going to deal with this? Yes, there is lots of stuff happening on social media. You can read about it, but I want authentic information. I
Yeah.
want the real thing. What is it that I should be worried about? Then your pregnancy. How am I going to deal with my children? How should I raise them? Then how am I being, how should I combine my career with my life? So there are so many things. Then, of course, even when you grow older, when you become an empty nester, or if you lose your partner, at every stage you're looking for someone, you're looking for that guiding light, because you can't do it all by yourself. So we are social people, we're living in a world with our people around us. So definitely we're looking for those people, we're looking for those stories which can tell us that, okay, this is how it's going to be.
Also, I think it's because to do with having a sisterhood of stories,
Yes.
not just finding motivation and answers, because not everybody's lost, but to know that yes, what my experiences, my questions, my doubts, my feelings, my emotions are as real as anybody else, and somebody else has also navigated this path, and maybe what are the choices she made, and what were the consequences of that.
Yes.
Sometimes when you feel like you belong to someone, and just as a storyteller, I work with different groups of women,
Hmm.
and I'll describe what are those women and how I work with them. But most importantly, I feel that I always talk about how women uh, need to take agency of their stories, the
Yes.
agency of their life, so that the moment they know that I am not a victim of my circumstances, I am not somebody which life happens to. I know what's happening in my life, and I know the kind of paths that I'm following. And at any given point of time, the reins of my life are in my hands. That changes the way a woman looks at her circumstances, right? And at the same time, listening to you talk, and I felt that women sort of invest in their stories a lot more than men do. Men don't think about their lives in so many parameters that I'm a young boy, I'm going to get married, I'm going to have children, I'm going to have a wife, I will lose my parents one day, I will, perhaps lose my partner one day, I may be a single dad. Do men really invest in their life stories and thinking and seeking all of this? Not everybody does that.
No,
So,
not everybody does it.
yeah,
I think
no,
it's also because I think also because somewhere women come from a space where we are made to think that you will be dependent on someone.
yeah,
So here now we are in times where we are looking to become independent. Men have always been told that you're the one who somebody is going to be dependent on, whereas a woman has always been told, I mean, so there are psychological studies which
yeah,
show that girls are raised to believe that you will be dependent on other people.
yeah,
So
yeah.
when you're coming from that space and you want to carve out your independence, you may get lost. And sometimes it may not be just losing, it just may be resonating with you that, okay, in this situation, I did this, it was perfectly fine. Because you could
Mm,
have somebody in your life who's telling you that what you did was not right. But
mm,
when you listen to another woman talking about it and you say that, okay, this was
yeah.
perfectly fine the way I handled this situation. So I think it is because of this. And also, just on the side, I would like to mention one more thing. I also feel that though a number of women now are seeking to become independent in various ways, there is still a section out there which may be belonging to a particular strata of society. I cannot say for sure, who's still very complacent about things. So I have a rich dad, so I'm qualified, I can work, but it's okay if I don't. All right. Or I have a husband and he's very well off. He can take care of me and it's okay if I just, leave everything to him.
The
So
privilege. You
the
call it the
privilege.
privilege of being a woman in a certain
So
circumstance.
that sometimes troubles me because I feel that while the going is good, it's fine.
Mm.
But why should you hand over the reins of your life to someone else? You don't always
Yeah.
have to fight about things. You don't always have to create unpleasantness, but at least take control of your life and just don't go with the flow because of a certain kind of a lifestyle which the man in your life, whoever it may be, is able to offer. And what I've seen is that a lot of young girls also nowadays I have seen are falling prey to this. Though we do
Hmm.
have a segment which is, wanting to carve out that independence and all of that, but there is this section also. We cannot kind of, uh, ignore that. Mm.
Sangeeta, let's just sort of pivot towards, you mentioned something about uh, a certain section of women who come with a certain thought. Now, I'll talk about the kind of women I work with. So I help women tell their stories.
Mm.
And the kind of women that I've worked with through the nonprofit work that I've done with NGOs who work with women entrepreneurs, particularly from rural India, from tier 2, tier 3 cities,
Yeah.
some from semi-urban areas of a metropolitan city like Delhi, and of course, upper middle class, entrepreneurs who perhaps were women who were, homemakers who suddenly started a business, or women who've studied everything, the MBAs of the world. They've chosen to leave their jobs and now they're transitioning towards becoming an entrepreneur. So in all of this, I do see women of a certain section, let's call it, who have access to social media, who have access to thought leadership platforms like your magazine, the podcast, LinkedIn, social, all kinds of platforms or networks where
Yeah.
they can step forward and find that sisterhood of stories to, navigate their paths, handle their motherhood, handle their careers, handle their businesses and all kinds of agency. They get a lot of help. But there is also a lot of a part of India which doesn't have access to that. I
Yeah.
mean, we are telling their stories that, okay, a small entrepreneur or a self help group in Assam is doing such excellent work. and we're telling their stories, giving them some visibility, but they don't get the visibility, or they don't get the equal platform to
Yeah.
seek out stories which can help them take the right decisions, or even dream big for that matter, because access to information is sort of restricted. So
Yeah.
if, let's say, there is an 18-year-old girl listening to our conversation in a tier
Hmm.
2, tier 3 city, and she feels that she wants to talk about women in her neighborhood, and maybe her mothers and her aunts and her friends and her teachers, and she just wants to create some kind of a movement with the stories in her community, and through those stories engage the women and have their voices heard, or give them the space to share it, like the way you have done it, right?
Hmm.
What steps should an 18-year-old young girl do and take to be able to create a platform like the way you have?
See, I think before you even create a platform, just putting, getting all your ideas together. What is it that you want to do? And
Hmm.
how serious are you about it? Is it like, just a 1 minute thing that, okay, I want to do it today, but I'm not so sure about whether I want to carry it forward? How driven are you? So, first of all, I think just start writing, start talking to people. And then, with digitalization, with the way technology is exploding everywhere, a lot of people have smartphones nowadays. You can just put your phone and start talking. And, even doing a podcast, creating a podcast is not that difficult. So, I'll give you
Yeah.
my own example. I'd been writing for a very long time. And this was last year in the month of April, I think the last week of April. I met this friend of mine. We were at somebody's house and we were just kind of about to leave when she sat me down and she said, "Look, why don't you start a podcast?" So this hadn't ever entered into my scheme of things. I speak as part of my profession, but I had never thought of doing a podcast. So I said, "Why would I do that?" She said, "Why not?" She said, "You have so much to say
Mm.
that you can't always keep writing because you also have limited time. And second of all, not everybody wants to read.
Yeah.
So if you do a podcast, you are obviously creating content which is accessible to more people." So I said, "I don't know how to do it." She said, "Look, you're educated. Go figure it out. Go Google it. You will find a way." And I am not exaggerating. I came back from that party. It was probably 12 o'clock. I Googled. I tried to figure out how can I do it. And even now, my process is very, very simple. I figured that I could go to Spotify. There is Spotify for podcasters. I can interview. I can do it over Zoom. I can then, upload it there. I can do my show notes. Of course, I have evolved over a period of time. And you won't believe it. We had this conversation on a Saturday. And the following Thursday, my first episode was up and about.
And that's it. That's how
So
easy it is.
exactly, it's
Yeah.
very easy. So, like they say, where there is a will, there is a way. So, first of all,
Absolutely.
you have to have the will. If you have the will, believe me, the way will come. It's not like I said, everybody has access to Google nowadays. You
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
Google it. You don't have to go and ask anybody. Gone are
Yeah.
those days when you needed somebody to tell you how to do it. You can
Mm.
just do it yourself. So, it
Uh,
is very simple.
Having said that, I just wanted to sort of ask this question that, again, going back to that 18-year-old, being a writer, a podcaster, an editor, and particularly focusing on women's stories, has it changed the way you look at womanhood?
So it hasn't changed the way, yes, of course, I have become more aware of different kinds of situations, different kinds of experiences which women go through because I'm talking to so many people, I'm
Hmm.
writing about so many. And now, in that sense, I would say that my ears and eyes are more open, I'm more observant. Like I remember when I used to do these short stories, I used to come up with a story every week. So my friends used to ask me, "How do you get the idea?"
Hmm.
So I should tell them, "I don't get it. I mean, I'm just looking at, maybe it's your story. It's my story. It is her story." So the moment you want to do it, the ideas will come to you. So what has changed is that I have more information.
Yeah.
I know, like I said, about different situations, experiences, but it's not as though I've started looking at womanhood in a different way. The only thing which pains me really, and which I mentioned earlier, was this strata which, given all the privileges, given all those facilities, still don't want to do anything about it. And there I feel somewhere it's the way they've been raised. I'm
So
not saying that boys are
it's been
not raised
taken
like that.
away. Yeah.
They are raised, but somewhere, boys are always made to believe that you've got to work, you've got to earn, whereas this strata gives the best education to their daughters. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think, as far as education is concerned, everybody now believes that women have to be educated. But what do you do with that education?
Nothing.
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 And that saddens me. And sometimes I do talk about it, and I think I put my foot in the mouth when I speak too much about it. But that saddens me, because I feel that so much of time and effort, so many resources just gone down the drain. So yeah.
It's not
So
about
now,
the resources there to sort of create a nice fancy profile. It doesn't.
yeah,
It's
but
not
then you
meant to
are, I mean,
yield you
if you're
something.
going to the
Yeah.
best college of this planet,
Hmm.
you're probably taking away
Yeah.
somebody else's
Somebody
right,
else's
more
seat. Yeah.
deserving.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You for the longest time didn't feature men in your on your platform, but I know I heard you talking about it. That how you've started inviting men, and in fact, you spoke about a couple of guests.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, and I think you were sort of people pointed that out. That are you a feminist? Do you? It's an anti-men
Yeah,
platform.
yeah.
And of course, you've established that earlier that talking about women doesn't make you anti-men. It is just about
Absolutely.
giving women a safe space to talk about. But at the same time, having men talk about women is also creating a safe space for men
Yeah,
to
yeah.
normalize a lot of
Yes,
conversations, right?
yes.
So, would you tell us something about your approach towards having men come on your platform and speak about women and their issues?
So, like you said, when I used to write, and people used to ask me, what is your platform called? About Her always meant against men.
Hmm.
Somewhere people used to have this impression, and of course, men used to have this impression. And I always used to tell them that her needs that opportunity, that safe space to talk about things. It doesn't mean that we're always talking about you or against you. No, these could be issues which we need to address ourselves. They have to do with us, they have nothing to do with you. Yes, there could be various issues which have to do with men, but not everything is about you. So sometimes I used to tell these men that don't put yourself up on a pedestal, that everything we do is about you. No, it isn't. A lot has to do with us. So that was there. Then, of course, as I was nearing the completion of my season 1, I realized that I am just, putting one perspective forward. And like I mentioned earlier, truly gender inclusive means you have to be inclusive, you have to include both the genders. So it is essential to get the other perspective also. So it is essential to get men on board and have them speak about their experiences, what they feel about what women are going through, and all of that. But having said that, I must point out that it's not easy to get men on the platform.
Mhm.
You know,
It's when it's called all about her. Is that
No,
why? Is
not
this the
only
name?
that. So I tell them, some of the men, when they look at the kind of questions that I want to ask them, they're very uncomfortable.
Hmm.
They don't want to talk about it. And I have gone through my list of questions several times sometimes to wonder that what is it that I'm asking that they don't want to talk about? But there are men. So then I feel, okay, maybe it could be a one off thing, but then it isn't a one off thing. Many
Is it
men
the
have.
vulnerability? Is it the vulnerability or the closeness that you get to when asking a question to a man? Is that what they're
You know,
uncomfortable with?
I could be wrong, but sometimes I feel that maybe what you are providing as an answer to my question is not the reality. What
Hmm,
you're actually
absolutely.
doing is different from what you are
Yeah,
going to be saying out there. So you
yeah.
don't want that dichotomy in your
Dissonance.
life,
Yeah,
and you don't want the women in your life to say, Are, you don't do this at home, but you went and
yeah,
spoke about it. So that
yeah,
could also be one of the
yeah.
reasons. Though, of course, I'm not sure, but somewhere I've got this feeling that this could
Mm-hmm,
be.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I, in my experience, and because you brought this up, so I work to a certain some extent in the DEI space with
Hmm.
organizations, helping them navigate conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there we talk about, you know, obviously the man, the woman, the LGBTQI, and all kinds of identities that
Yeah.
coexist, and to be curious about all identities and to create a space which is inclusive. And in my work, we sort of come across certain conversations where a lot of inherent bias, ignorance, little knowledge, small knowledge also
Yeah.
comes forward. And sometimes I've seen men shy away from the fact that I don't know enough, or what I know is not the right thing to say, or the way I
Mm.
look at it is not the right thing to say. So I think, because again, men have never been invited to this conversation
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
women about certain things, or
Right.
it happens within closed doors, with I mean, with their, maybe their partners, intergenerational conversation of how you looked at your mother, how you look at your wife, how you look at your daughter, the kind of liberties each of these three generations have had in their lifetime. These are things which are not articulated very well
Yes.
in the home space. So, which
Mm.
is why men at the workplace find it very difficult to
Yeah. Yeah.
navigate this. So, I do understand that it's important for men to also get into the conversation and not to justify the way they think and feel,
Yeah.
but also to
Yeah.
maybe from a space of curiosity. Right? Do
Right.
you agree to that?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know,
Yeah.
like we are the victim of the way we've been raised.
Hmm.
Similarly, men are also victims because they have been, like, say, when you have a young boy at home, you're giving them planes, fighter planes, and all these action heroes and action figures to play with while you're giving the girls dolls to play with. The differentiation starts there, the pink and the blue. So the differentiation starts there. So if the differentiation is affecting the woman in a particular way, it is also affecting the man. You can't blame the men because this is how they've been raised. This is what they've been told you must believe. So you cannot cry, you cannot be emotional. Why? So this is all the way they've been raised.
Conditioning.
So,
Conditioning.
like, this is a very, very like deeply embedded conditioning. So then
Yeah.
you can't always blame them. They don't know any better. So that is why it is important for them to come together and at least be open to this idea that, look, I have a way of doing things, I have a certain way of thinking, or I have a certain point of view about something, but I must listen to what the other person has to say. That intent has to be there. Nobody is saying that you know it, you don't know it. That's why this whole thing is there. Men and women don't have similar kind of experiences or beliefs, or the stereotypes that they have to face. But that's the whole point. But at least have the intent of wanting to understand the other person. That, I think, is step one in that direction, and then the rest will follow naturally.
I think times have also moved, Sangeeta, that from a generation where men didn't invest in women's stories to understand them more closely, to a point where we have men in society who are very uncomfortable with the woman and her conversation, to young boys, perhaps
Yes.
your boys, who have,
Yes.
one
Yes.
of them gave you the confidence to write and share, and you picked up writing about women. I think that generation is far more comfortable talking about
Oh,
women,
yes.
talking about women's
Absolutely.
stories. So, for young boys, like your son's age, what will they find when they come to About Her? Whether they listen to your podcast, whether they come to your platform, what kind of information, what kind of stories will they find? How will it help them understand the female gender?
See, so this I will share from what my elder son tells me. He says that you, as far as, for me to get married is concerned, you set the bar very high.
Mm.
Because when I look at you, I see that here is a woman who has been working all her life, who's absolutely independent in every way. She's had her share of ups and downs, but she's faced those. And then at this age and stage, she is busier than the rest of the family put together. She never has time. So, and that purpose, that drive that I see, and the way she is open to talking about things, getting people involved, he feels that there is a lot of inspiration out here. Not only for girls, not only for young women, but for men and young boys as well. He feels that when I listen to some woman talking about her struggle or what she had to go through, he says it makes me understand that yes, she's older, maybe my generation will not go through this, but then they have gone through this, right? And my younger one, who's 24, he's even more forthcoming. So he says that a lot of issues that you talk about are passe now because we don't face such things because we don't talk about it. But he says again, The perspective helps me understand older women when I'm working, and I have women in my workplace who are older and believe certain things. He says that helps me to navigate those
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah.
That, he says the generation gap which we have, I am able to bridge that better when I mean, after having heard this, or after having spoken about or read what you have written. So it's very interesting, actually. Sometimes, I do share some pieces which I've written, and which, I feel these boys should also know.
Yeah.
Because, like, charity begins at home, for
I
me.
mean,
I mean, if
you
my kids
every
don't
every
understand.
st- every storyteller, and particularly if she's a mother, she tells the story for her child first, and
Yes,
then she
yes,
figures out how that will. No, I think it's very important, and you brought a very beautiful thing about understanding, the history of why certain women behave the
yes,
way they do,
yeah,
and
yeah,
maybe while their generation is not dealing with the same challenges, but
yeah,
a certain other woman born somewhere else at another time may have had to deal with what you are doing, and that sort of naturally ups their empathy for other
absolutely,
women. And
absolutely.
it's through that understanding that even the women in my generation could be dealing with other things, which my mother
Yes,
perhaps is not
yes.
talking about. So at least I'm curious about what they are dealing with.
So, like, I'll give an example. I mean, I'm forgetting the name of this show which just came with Ananya Pandit recently,
Ananya
where she
Pandey,
is Pandey, sorry, where
call
she
me
is,
Bay.
yes, call me babe. So, the first scene where she gets kicked out of the house,
Hmm.
right? So, I was watching this with my son, and I just stopped him there. I said, I want to know. We don't want to go into, I mean, of course, we'll watch the rest of it later. But what I want to understand is, why was this girl raised to become someone who can be kicked out of the house just because of whatever may be the reason?
Hmm.
So I wrote a whole article on that. That why are we raising such girls who are, who have the best of everything, but they cannot fend for themselves?
Yeah.
Right. So then this was something that my younger one absolutely related. I mean, he lives in New York, but still, he said, yes, there are a lot of girls in my circle also who are just studying or who are just working for now, but once they get married, they probably want to sit at home and do nothing.
Yeah.
So I said, then this can happen. This is
It's
something
true.
that
This
they
is
need to be.
reality. This is
This is
reality.
reality. What she does later on is different.
Yeah.
They were, of course, it was a story and all of that, and for some girls that story may come true, but for a lot of girls that will not come true. And then your parents are also just, kind of sending you away somewhere because they're ashamed of you, whatever it is.
Mhm.
Why be in that situation? And in today's day and age, when there is so much exposure, there is so much awareness, why
I
would you let
I
yourself
I
become a
think
victim?
OTT is also telling stories of women as it is really unraveling in the country right now. But it's
Yeah.
also sort of pushing a lot of our viewers to look beyond their own
Yes.
lives and what is on television to sort of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
look at it that way. So yeah, great. I mean, we could talk an entire episode on the women that we find in OTT and our films. So my last question to you, Sangeeta, is that I read that you have a personal goal of visiting 500 bookstores in
Yeah.
your lifetime, and that's a fantastic goal to have. Uh, so, tell us how many have you covered so far?
120.
Oh wow, 120 already.
Yes.
Okay, having done that, what are the three, let's say, books that every girl, every woman should read? Would you have a pick to share?
Okay, so I'll tell you, I am actually more of a fiction reader. So I write, because I'll tell you what, I just feel that rather than just sermonizing, and rather than just giving lectures about this, if you weave it into the form of a story, the reader is able to relate to it more. Because I may be reading about situations that I have gone through or someone around me has gone through. So I think the message hits home more effectively when it is told. Of course, you know this. Why am I telling you this? When the message, goes through in the form of a story. But then, having said that, three books. There is one book called Invisible Women that I read, maybe a couple of years ago. which actually shed light on so many things around us. When we look at data, we look at statistics, and we wonder why things are happening in a certain way. When I read that book, it opened my eyes to the fact that that data, whatever data we are basing our decisions on, are based on men. It hasn't got anything to do with women. So whether it is, the number of car accidents, or health issues, whatever, so that data is largely driven by observing men. So
Men.
that is one book which I feel that most women, every woman should read. Then since I've been talking about fiction, there's this book that I read many many years ago. It's called Nightingale by Christine Hanna. That was a very very moving book for me, because it made me cry, because that talks of a woman's resilience, her patience, her fighting spirit. I'm not trying to glorify misery, or whatever tough times you go through, but this is life.
Yeah.
Whether it's a man or a woman, you've got to have the resilience, you've got to have the patience, you've got to have the staying power. So I think this was one of those books which really brought that out in a very very in a very, like I said, in a story like way, which of course had its roots in reality. You're talking about the world war and you're picking up from there. So very very real. Of course you cannot relate to the events because we've not been through all of that, but it could be anything.
Yeah.
Right. So how that comes through. And then there was another one which I read again many many years ago, which is Thornbirds. That was another book which actually, I just love women centric fiction and non-fiction
I
as
can
well.
see that. Yeah, I can
Yeah,
see that.
so that also, these little things, that how a woman just has the ability to keep everyone together. You could be working, even if you're working at home, that spirit in you, I don't know, I mean, obviously it's natural that women can keep everyone together. That, that expression they use of mother hen, that is so true, because you just like to keep your flock together. And what women in different scenarios, different ages, stages, have always been doing, and I think will continue to do. So these three books, I mean, I'm sure there are others also which I can't remember, but
Yeah.
since these are the books on top of my mind, maybe these are the ones that I love the most.
Yeah.
So I just spoke to a guest the other day, and she said, imagine you thinking that you will live till the age of 80.
Well,
And, on the surface, 80 seems like, oh my God, I have such a long life. She said, but you realize it's only 80 summers.
mm,
So that, put things in a different perspective altogether. So do
yeah.
what you want to do. Don't limit yourself. Don't hold yourself back. The world is your oyster. Go explore. Don't let anybody hold you back. I mean, like I said, you don't have to go and fight with people, but there are ways of getting your point across. So don't let your ambitions, your hopes, aspirations die. Give vent to them, do something about them, because there you have a lot to offer. Don't underestimate yourself. That's what I
What a beautiful way to sort of close our conversation as well, Sangeeta, because I think
think.
that's the perfect note. Uh, I believe that amazing things happen when people take ownership of their stories, men and women, but
Absolutely.
more so for women, because women's stories are rarely held by themselves. They are sort of packaged and edited and polished and cooked and prettied up by
Yes.
men, and they are prettied up by men and women.
Yeah. Yeah.
And therefore, it's important to sort of take agency, take that ownership back. And
Absolutely.
like you mentioned beautifully, that amazing things happen if you just sort of look at your life, saying that you have 80 summers, and what are you going to do? There are 80 plans to be had. And
Yeah.
don't let anybody make your plans, make them yourself.
Right.
And there's so much
Absolutely.
life
Because
that's
if
waiting
you
for you.
don't make them yourself, somebody else will do it for you.
And you
And
will not like it.
yes, absolutely. So take ownership.
Right. Oh, lovely, Sangeeta. Thank you so much for having this conversation. I think women and women's stories, we can have a long, long, long conversation.
Yes,
But I'm
absolutely.
so glad you're doing it, and you're doing it so well. More power to you, more listeners to your podcast, more readers to your stories, and keep up the good work. And thank you
Thank you
so
so
much for
much for
speaking to me.
having me on the show. It was indeed wonderful. And of course, like you said, these kind of conversations are never ending because we have so much to say. But thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Hi, this is Rituparna. Thank you for listening to the Storied Way Perspective. This is a bi-monthly podcast where you will meet storytellers, influencers, entrepreneurs, coaches, thought leaders, and experts as I ask them what can stories do in the world today. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and everywhere else. Look out for the Storied Way Perspective with Rituparna. No matter where you listen to us, please rate, review, and share the podcast. This helps me know you are listening. You can also write to me at podcast@yourstorybag.com. I will wait to hear from you.